The murder of George Floyd exactly 1 year ago today led to one of the largest protest movements in U.S. history. People crowded into the streets and demanded racial justice and police reform. President Biden called on Congress to take action on police reform by today in George Floyd's name, but negotiations in the Senate are stalled. Democratic Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey joins us now. Good morning, Senator. You said meaningful progress is being made in these negotiations. Where do talks stand right now, and how soon can we expect a deal?
Well, we want to get this deal right and not quick. And I'm very encouraged. There's been hours and hours every day of talks. And I'm really hopeful that we can get something done in the weeks ahead, not months. But we're going to continue to work, and there's been a lot of great input from civil rights organizations to even national police leadership. Everybody feels, I believe, a shared commitment to get something substantive, meaningful done that will create more transparency, more accountability. And when officers do things that are violative of laws, civil rights, constitutional rights, that there's meaningful consequences, that there's no one in this country above the law.
Qualified immunity, which often protects officers from being sued in civil court, seems to be one of the sticking points in the negotiations. Is there a compromise between Democrats and Republicans on this? And do you still have transparency and accountability without qualified immunity?
Well, I wish there was just one sticking point. There are still some gulfs to bridge. But I'm encouraged with Senator Tim Scott, who's my Republican counterpart in the Senate, negotiating with me, that we both have shared values. We're both African-American men who, even through our lived experience, have very difficult issues in our pasts with police officers. So we both agree that the death of George Floyd just highlighted some of the real problems. How can an officer with that many citizen complaints be out teaching other officers? We know that our shared values of accountability and transparency and consequence when you break laws have to be the core pillars of this law, or it's not worth us doing something. So I feel that there's a moment in history right now. The White House has been extraordinarily helpful, the Department of Justice, police leadership, and especially civil rights groups. So again, I know that this is a moment. We haven't had meaningful police reform in this country for decades, and they're clearly, as we see this drumbeat of god-awful deaths and violence against unarmed African Americans, we all have to share a collective urgency in this country to change laws, to expand accountability, and to work to end a crisis that right here in Washington, Martin Luther King, in his I Have a Dream speech, was speaking about police brutality. The Kerner Commission and other commissions decades ago were pointing out many of the very same problems we're dealing with now. We have to do something about this.
I want to pick up, Senator Booker, what you just said about you and Tim Scott. Both men of color who have had lived experiences, who have talked about your encounters with police. How much pressure do you feel, either self-imposed or pressure from the outside, to get this done this time? You know, when George Floyd was first murdered, there were calls on both sides. Everybody thought this was a moment, finally something will happen, and a year later we are still talking. Do you feel a lot of pressure yourself?
I feel the weight of obligation. I'm going to meet with the Floyd family today. He was a son. He was a father. He was a brother. And we failed him. Not just Derek Chauvin, he was to blame, but we all have been responsible for having a system in America that has allowed things like this to happen with such frequency. So yes, and you know, when Tim and I have been in private as well as public, I think he gave one of the more meaningful speeches on race in this country, talking about him as a United States Senator and his unfortunate encounters with law enforcement. And so we have to make progress here. We cannot lose this moment. Millions of Americans went out into the streets in one of the greatest demonstrations for justice that we've had in the history of our nation. I think we need change at the federal government, state governments, local police departments. But I feel that, and that's why I'm working with such determination and urgency.
I had heard that part of the negotiations were taking part in the Strom Thurmond room. I didn't know such a thing existed. That strikes me as ironic that you, Tim Scott, and other people of color are negotiating this particular issue in that room.
Yeah, I think that this is one of those moments in history where Karen Bass, myself, and Tim were in a room named the Strom Thurmond room, the person who has the record in the Senate for the longest filibuster, who was trying to stop civil rights legislation that eventually passed. As I sat there, I had to note it to my friends and colleagues that we are living a moment where never before in American history have we seen, 3 black men serving at the same time in the United States Senate. 2 of them, and Reverend Warnock is a part of this, but all of us working so hard to get something done to begin to make progress again on this horrible legacy of systematic racism and disparate impact on communities. And so we have a painful history, and frankly, with the continued awful things from Louisiana and across the country, we have a painful present, and we all are invested in doing something about it, regardless of what our race or ethnicity. We have ideals in this country, equal justice under the law, liberty and justice for all, that are not being fulfilled. And I'm just pray that the arc of the moral universe is bent a little bit more towards justice through the labors of folk in the Senate over the next few weeks.
Well, you and Tim Scott on both sides of the aisle working together. Everyone is watching. We thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you, Gayle. Thank you, Enrique.